Okay, this is a test. I'm gonna test this. Because I'm about to do a Dan rant, and it's my thing now. My thing is doing Dan rants, ranting about politics and economics and finance. Mostly about, like, dark magic and shit. But politics, economics, and finance are a form of dark magic. So, hey folks, Dan here. I'm going to be doing more videos like this, where I just kind of talk off the cuff about things that are on my mind, things that are in the news, and try to put my own little personal spin on what's happening and draw on all the weird books I read and the weird ideas I'm fascinated by to contextualize whatever's going on in my brain at any given time. If this is what you're into, I'm starting to try and build Anthromancer's Patreon. So modern magician videos, which is what these are morphing into. I'm going to be trying to do these weekly, and it would be incredibly wonderful if a couple of folks who watch this would take a look and maybe consider backing me on Patreon, becoming a patron. I'm just getting that thing set up and started, so I'm figuring it out as I go, but presumably that'll get you things like shout-outs in videos, access to content behind the scenes, and down the road I'd like to give people the opportunity to give me feedback on Anthromancer game types and all kinds of other things, like, if you're into the things I'm into, if you're into the art I make and the things that I'm naturally drawn to produce with my time and energy, it would be incredibly helpful if you would support me financially, so check that out. Anyway, what I want to talk about today is I want to talk about GameStop. Now, GameStop is a retail chain that buys and sells video games, and you probably haven't been in one in a while because why would you? You can buy everything online. Most video games you can just download straight to your consoles these days, and GameStop as a retailer has been sort of slowly decaying, going out of business. I know some people that worked at GameStop and have told me the inner workings of the business is they're not accommodating the modern era very well, and they will not be long for this world. However, if you've been online at all in the last couple days, you will probably have heard that GameStop's stock price is through the roof. And why is that? It doesn't make any sense. Not really. It's not tied to any material thing. It's not like GameStop is we're getting into AI or some crazy thing like that. What's happening is a community of people on Reddit, and presumably other communities as well, but specifically the one I hear about is r/Wall Street Bets, are coordinating their purchasing of GameStop stock specifically to raise its price artificially, specifically to punish hedge funds who have invested a lot of money in the assumption that GameStop will soon be out of business. Doing what's called short selling, or betting against the future of a business on the stock market. Now, I'm not a stock investor, and I don't really know a whole lot about the specific in and outs. It's probably not as complicated as some people might want you to think. But the long and short of why I want to talk about this is because I think this is a great, beautiful... One of the things that I really love and really love talking about and think is a really important thing for people to understand is that money is bullshit. That money and the traditional mechanisms and levers of finance and all these fancy words, and it's all just magic spells that only work based upon the way people think they work. The ultimate value of money doesn't come from anything inherent to reality. It's not backed up by grain, or even if it was backed up by gold, which it isn't anymore. The US dollar was uncoupled from the gold standard in the 70s. Even if it was, it begs the question, why is gold valuable? And I think this fuckery, right? This kind of weird, these hijinks that are happening. Apparently there's a hedge fund called Melvin Capital that's losing $3 billion because of a bunch of people on Reddit deciding they want Melvin Capital to lose $3 billion. And I think one of the reasons that people are so excited about it and talking about this is because this is an evidence of regular people coordinating through a platform that just about anybody can use, coordinating their efforts to punish people that normally can't be punished, to specifically make billionaire hedge fund managers feel pressure of some kind. And given everything that's going on in the world today, there's no war but class war. The world is fucked, and people on top are getting richer while people on the bottom, which is most people, the bottom 90% and then some, are getting poorer every day. We've got 400,000 people in the United States that have died of the coronavirus while rich people are getting the vaccine. We are seeing the imbalanced effects of climate change. You know, there's a concept called climate apartheid that minority communities and communities that are impoverished are going to feel the effects of climate change much harder than the people that can just fuck off to their moon base or whatever. And so this is like the predominant theme of our age, that there's this untouchable elite who are untouchable for the specific reason that they have too much money to be touched. And so there's something very cathartic, I think, and very exciting about watching a phenomenon like this unfold, where somebody who has $1 billion might have a bad emotion as a specific result of a coordinated effort by people on Reddit. It's just a cool thing. Now, that I'm sure that won't last. I'm sure they're going to change the rules. I'm sure that this is an edge case they didn't predict, and now they're going to be trying to regulate differently or do something to make it so that this can't happen anymore, because now that this bug, this glitch, this exploit has been found, that people can just, let's all buy GameStop stock and make it go through the roof. Now that that's been found, it's a matter of time because again, billionaires own the government. So like, democracy is not real. It's another thing that's a joke. But all that aside, I think this is a great opportunity to talk about something that is underpinning all of this and finance in general. There's actually a book I wanted to mention. And I think everybody, I don't care who you are, I don't care if you think you're smart or dumb or whatever, I think you should read this book. This is called Debt: The First 5,000 Years. It's by the anthropologist David Graeber, rest in peace, passed away last year. It is probably the most important book I've ever read, and it completely changed the way I think about finance and economics. And what I'd like to do in this video, if I have time to, if I'm able to, is just talk a little bit about some of the major ideas that I have taken from this book and have continued to influence my worldview. And so when I see things like the GameStop stock skyrocket, I think about this book. Because I have this conversation a lot, because if you know me at all, if you've heard me talk, you'll know that I'm really interested in Bitcoin, in cryptocurrency, in blockchain, and in the ways that these sort of explode some of the myths that we have been telling about money. And I guess it's not a complete one-to-one comparison to the stock market thing, but I'm just going to go dive right into it. So basically, if you know about Bitcoin, that's another thing that's been a sort of fascinating phenomenon over the last couple of years, where there's this thing that is skyrocketing in value, and it's hard to understand why. Even if you understand the technology, even if you understand the underlying mechanisms that allow it to work, which a lot of people don't because it's a little arcane and weird. It's all this complicated computer math shit. But when I tried to teach myself how Bitcoin worked, I kept coming to this wall in my reasoning where I was like, okay, I understand that there's these computers and they all have a ledger and they all update at the same time. Why is it worth something? Why do people want this? Are people willing to give, I think last time I checked it was like $30,000 for a single Bitcoin. How did this asset, this thing that doesn't exist, that only exists on a code, an algorithm, that somebody presumably created in their fucking garage, why is this so valuable now? And I think philosophically that sort of invites the next question, which is, why is money valuable? Like, in order to understand why any asset is valuable, you got to look at an asset that has value and try and understand why that has value, and then compare and contrast and see, well, what does this do differently, et cetera, et cetera. And it was this book that helped me understand why currency has value. There's a lot of myths that David Graeber explores in Debt that I am grateful for the opportunity to understand, because we don't talk about this stuff. There's always there's these certain implicit assumptions about finance and capital and money and economics that I think are just kind of baked into our world and the way we think about money. But one of the things that I was never taught and never really thought about was the origins of currency as we know it. There's one of the main myths that Graeber wants to destroy with Debt is the myth of barter. And he talks about how, like, there's a widely held assumption that the order of operations, the order in which currency developed, was that at one point long in the past we had a barter system. and villages of people would trade goods, and it was very unequal. Because, like, if you have a cow and you need a chicken, well, a cow's probably worth more than a chicken, but maybe the guy you want to get the chicken from doesn't have more than one chicken, and so you're stuck in this situation where it's like, well, how do we... And so there's all these colloquial myths, like there's an episode of Ed, and Eddie where they talk about, like, oh, we want to trade to get a jawbreaker, and they end up having to run all the way around their cul-de-sac trading one object with somebody else because he wants this and he wants this, and you have to find the perfect amalgamation of goods and services you can trade with everybody just so you can get the one thing from the first guy. And this is a very common myth. And then the myth goes that after, at a certain point, somebody realized, oh, this would make a lot more sense if we had a currency that could represent the value of these things, because then you can modulate that into smaller quantities and sort of have ratios of, like, this cow equals 500 gold coins and this chicken equals 50 gold coins. And so if I have 500 gold coins, I can just give you 50 gold coins and I don't have to split my cow in half. I still have the, it works. And then after that comes systems of credit, as we understand them, where you have a ledger tracking who has how much value here and there, who has credit with who, and that's central banking and that sort of thing these days. Graeber's like, one of the first things he talks about in this book is he's like, that's backwards. That's totally backwards. Because as an anthropologist, his job has been to understand how societies interact with each other, how people treat one another, and how different bands of humans have conducted their affairs. And he points out that, like, the myth of barter has it all backwards, because if you think about it, back in the day, if I have a cow and you have a chicken and I need that chicken to make a fancy stew or something like that, if you live in a Neolithic village with people and you're just standing around working day in and day out, you see each other, you're effectively a sort of tribal family, and I say, hey, I could use a chicken, chances are good your buddy is just going to be like, yeah, here you go, and give you the chicken. And remember that you owe him something roughly chicken-sized, something roughly chicken equivalent, or maybe better for what I want to say next is, I need a cow. Can I have that cow? Guy gives you the cow, and the guy knows that later on he can be like, so your daughter's pretty hot. Remember when I gave you that cow? I'd like to have your daughter's hand in marriage. And what Graeber says is, like, this is a credit system. This is a system where people are keeping a running tally in their heads, an invisible ledger in their minds of who owes who what. And it's not exact and algebraic, and there's no like specific centralized unit, no currency that helps people keep track of the ratios of value from thing to thing. It's much more informal and flexible and social. It's very much based on your social relations with people, but that came first. Credit systems come first. And here's where it gets really interesting to me, is that when currency comes into the equation, where you see currency first pop up, he basically explains that currency, gold coins, right? Like the idea of gold coins, society has no need for currency until a centralized authority, a government, a king, a kingdom, wants to keep a standing army. Because to keep a standing army, you need to have a whole class of people whose job is to train and go to war. Their job is war and conquest. They are warriors. They are the warrior caste. And as there's nothing inherently productive about being a warrior. Like when your job is destruction. Your job is to destroy enemies, to conquer other lands. But within yourself, your job isn't to farm, your job isn't to build, your job isn't to do anything that is like the stuff that keeps society functioning. So if you're a king and you want to keep a standing army so you can go and conquer and take the other guy's shit, you need to take everybody that isn't in the army and find a way to convince them to work for the benefit of the army. Right? Because if we live in a perfect anarchy, right? And perfect anarchy, and some guy shows up and tells me that I need to start giving my crops to this guy down the street who doesn't do anything productive except go and shoot somebody else, it's really easy for me to be like, no, fuck you. Like, these are my crops. I worked on these. I'm going to keep these. So how do you get people peacefully to voluntarily give up their own labor and their own time and energy to keep this standing army fed and clothed and entertained so that they can go and do conquest? Well, what these centralized systems figured out was like, hey, we've got this really beautiful shiny metal, and it's soft, so we can print our faces on it. And so we're going to print our faces on it, and what we're going to do is we're going to give a salary, a certain amount of gold, say, to our soldiers, and say, here's what we're going to pay you this coin, this valuable coin. And then we're going to tell everybody else in our society, hey, if you don't give me like 10 of those every year, I'll fucking kill you. I will throw you in prison until you starve to death. And I'll do it with these warriors. So it's very clever. The value of currency comes from the threat of violence at the hands of the state if you don't pay your taxes. Because when that becomes the proposition, if somebody shows up at your house in this perfect anarchy and says, hey, I got these dudes over here, they're all ready to kill you, they got swords and shit, all they do is push-ups, and I will send them to kill you unless you sell them some of your stuff in exchange for the coins I give them. Obviously, you'd be like, okay, I'll take some of those coins, man. And then everybody else in that society would start wanting those coins. They'd be like, I could use some coins, honestly. And one of the things that I found really interesting about this is that there's this assumption that gold has inherent value. But at the end of the day, if you're living on a homestead, farming for survival, and somebody shows up and says, hey, I got gold, who cares? Who needs gold? Nobody needs gold. Gold is pretty, but I guarantee you, if you're living for survival, you would rather have grain. You would rather have vegetables. You'd rather have a pig than gold. Gold only is valuable because it can get you the things you need to survive. And the reason it can get you the things you need to survive is because of this system that at the core, at the root of it, it all has value because if you don't pay your taxes, you'll get your ass kicked. The violence of this system is what gives currency value. So that's like, I know I started this on GameStop, but that's I think that is one of the foundational assumptions about money that nobody thinks about, nobody talks about. Literally, I feel like 99 out of 100 people, you ask them where the value of money comes from, and they will say something to the effect of, either we all agree it has value, which doesn't really answer the question, or it's tied to gold, which is no longer true, or even if you go to the gold, it's like, why does gold have value? Well, because it's shiny, and because there's a spiritual sacred quality to it. One of the things that Graeber talks about is how that spiritual sacred quality of gold seems to have sort of come after the fact. It wasn't necessarily seen as a sacred thing until we figured out we could print kings' faces on it and use it to rig this whole system so that armies could stand. And so when we talk about things like the GameStop stock skyrocketing, and we talk about things like the manipulation of financial markets, I think it's really important to go back to the root of where money gets its value and realize that this is basically a form of magic. It is an incentive system based on nothing, based on might, on violence. In a lot of ways, it is a form of magic. I mean, Anthromancer is the brand that I'm building here, and one of the things I'm trying to talk about is this concept of anthromancy, the magic of human consciousness, the ability to manipulate and change the way that people perceive the world and interact with the world, and the power that you have when you understand how it all works. Finance, currency, money is a deep and ancient form of anthromancy. Now, there's all kinds of other stuff. I don't want to get too much into it because I'm sure I've already talked more than I wanted these to be 5-minute videos, and I'm sure I've talked more than that at this point. But ultimately, when we see things like this happen, when we see the stock market being manipulated, when we see the price of Bitcoin skyrocketing, I want everybody to start realizing that this is fucking magic. Like, this isn't grounded in anything, and it never has been. It's never been grounded in anything inherent. It is all about human relationships and relationships of power. And I think that once you start to realize that, you start to realize that you can sort of disentangle yourself from a lot of the assumptions of how this has to work. And that's what I really want to get at here, is that this system is a human-invented system that has nothing to do with the inherent laws of the universe. And so we can change it. We can come up with a different game. We've gotten to a point where, like, having a standing army isn't really good in a global society. It isn't really sensible because we don't have anybody to send people out and conquer. We don't have anybody to, nor should we. We need to be working together. The problems we're facing are global now. Climate change, nuclear disarmament, these sorts of things affect everybody on the planet just about equally. And if we're not working together to solve these problems, if we're still stuck in the mindset of violence and power and standing armies and conquest as a means to an end, at a certain point, when your standing army has access to nuclear arms, it's suicide. So we as a society need to realize that we aren't bound to doing things this way, that there's nothing underneath the GameStop stock price, like it's all a fucking game, and as such, it can be changed. That's the number one thing. That's the thing I want to be so loud about, because so many people are brilliantly creative and yet have never entertained the notion that they could put that creativity in a direction that challenges the fundamental assumptions about how finance works. We now sit in a world where something like Bitcoin, blockchain, cryptocurrency exists. And say what you will about its environmental impact, about the value of proof of work, hash power, and how much energy it consumes, or how capitalists are inevitably going to move their way into the market. And this is a currency backed by no state. No state violence underpins the Bitcoin market. No central government is issuing these coins and threatening people if they don't pay their taxes in Bitcoin. On the contrary, it is a challenge to that paradigm. And so I can't look at that without thinking, oh, there's something there. There's something there. And some clever bastard is going to figure out a way to use that unprecedented technological change. We've never had the networking capability to do something like this before. Somebody is going to figure out how to take that and do something that breaks economics as we know it. I don't know exactly how it'll look, but I know it's possible because nothing underpins the economics we currently have except a bunch of tradition, assumption, and forgotten myths. So once we dig those up and look at them and say, oh shit, this doesn't really make any sense, it's at that point that the possibilities start to become more realistic. That people with clever ideas and compassion in their hearts can start to take their creative powers, of which we all have. We're all brilliantly creative. Many of us just have that shit scarred out of us by institutions that are designed to serve the established order. But if we're able to sort of dig up these myths and dig up these assumptions and realize and sort of beginner's minded and approach these problems with a new perspective, we can do something to change it. And if we can change it, everything else, all the other injustices that have been built upon this fucked up system, can be addressed. Maybe I'm wrong. There are worse things than being wrong. Anyway, I think that's a good point to stop. Please pick up Debt by David Graeber. I love this book. I love this man. I'm very sad that he passed away. And check out Anthromancer on Patreon. Thanks for watching, folks. Bye!